Hello guys, in this video I would like to cover some architectural aspect of software development. Something that I noticed recently while doing code review, and I think it's one of the most common mistakes programmers do when they develop an application that works with database. Let me open some chart here so we can visualize this. Um, and when I say a database, it could be any time of persistent storage, right? Let's say this is a database. Then we have a client, I mean a user, a person here who works with your system. So there will be a system that eventually touch database. Okay. Let's look for some class or even maybe a use case. A use case. Use case, something like getting the request. So what user wants, he or she wants to get a request that is stored somewhere in database. Okay, and so this is the use case representation of it. Then we have in somewhere in the system we have a service, a class that is responsible somehow logically uh, for fetching the request from somewhere. Okay, request service. Then this service use some kind of object or class that is responsible for fetching data from the database. So if you think about it, it will be something like that. In this database, we will be having a bunch of objects. It could be a relation database, it could be a document like a JSON, doesn't matter. But in this case, I'll just show you that we have many elements, and these elements are request, like request 1, request 2, etc. And the logic is simple. User want to get some request or request, it use request service. That service use something like we call it repository. And the repository is a class that is responsible of fetching data from database. Okay, and there is a problem often. Let's talk about it. Let's say that this request consists of the request itself plus some request detail. And there is a connection between them. Okay, something like encapsulation. So it means like this request consists one or many elements of uh, request detail. Let's say one for simplicity. So it's gonna be one. Okay. And right now, what's going on? The user asks for this request, and quite often, what people do, like developers, instead of using, let's say, request repository, they create two repositories: request repository and then request detail repository. You see? and this repository fetching data from database. So basically what it means. User asks for it. It just wants to get a request, right? And the request exists, if you think about it, this request exists all together with the request detail, meaning that request detail cannot exist without the request. Okay, so these two guys, it's actually one guy, and we call it aggregate. Okay, and this is our logic. But quite often, what people do, they're not thinking about business. They're not thinking about the use case. That user never ever would like to get just details, request details, because it's impossible. Like all this comes together. Yet, just because they exist when developer work, he kind of maybe not necessarily see the full picture. He just sitting there on this layer, on repository layer. Actually, some people call it infrastructure layer, and they create two repositories. One request and another request detail. And if they do this, first of all, they kind of deviate from the business object itself. You know, my point is the repository is supposed to be dealing with aggregate, not with pieces of data that means nothing, right? It's supposed to be dealing with aggregate. And that's why we don't need this, okay? We don't need that. It's supposed to be like this. So when user asks for it, request repository, if necessary, will take care of the request, of details, will fetch it somehow, let's say with SQL, will connect all together, will do this mechanical work, and eventually it will get the response back to this service that eventually pass it to the sector, to the user, and the user will get exactly what he wants. The request that is full of sense, if we will. Um, the repository also could take care of, let's say, validation at some point, if necessary, to make sure. So basically, request repository will make sure that it will get data from database that is valid and makes sense to the business. It will not get any um, pieces of this object. So that's it. That's what I wanted to cover for today. And this is really common mistake that leads to all kind of different problems. Um, First of all, the problem of common sense, of following um, the business needs, right? And creating bunch of classes that deviates from the reality and makes it hard to reason about what user business wants. Okay, and there is a bunch of other low-level problems like transactions, validation, and all that stuff. If you not following the logic, the requirements, the business needs, if you don't see the aggregate, that's that, that's going to be a problem. Okay, enough for today. Thank you.